The text message pinged on my phone, its sharp sound cutting through the quiet of the morning. I had just finished brewing coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, and Amelia was upstairs getting ready for school. It was a normal day, a typical one. Or at least it should have been. I glanced at the screen, expecting the usual messages from my husband Gregory, asking about the kids' schedules, or maybe something small like his request for a lunch he liked. Instead, what I saw froze me in place. Bianca. I'm filing for divorce. I've emptied our joint account. I'm done. The words blurred in front of my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. A part of me was still waiting for him to follow up with something like, I'm just joking or I'll explain later. But no, it was final and it was happening right now in the cold, detached way of a text message, something that felt so impersonal, so cruel, and yet so entirely fitting for what had been happening for months. I didn't cry. Not at first. Instead, I felt a hollow rage filling my chest, the kind of anger you feel when the ground beneath you collapses and you're left trying to find your footing. How could he do this? How could he betray me like this with no warning, no conversation, just a cold, text-based declaration of the end? It was like the years we spent together meant nothing. Nothing but a memory that could be erased at the touch of a button. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was everything. He had taken everything we built, all the years of working together, all the sacrifices I had made for our family, and he had discarded it all in one cruel, thoughtless gesture. I put my phone down and took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It was too early for this. I wasn't ready to face the shattering truth of what was happening. But there it was staring me in the face, and I could no longer pretend everything was fine. I heard Amelia's footsteps on the stairs and I quickly wiped away the single tear that had escaped. No, not yet. I couldn't let her see me like this, not when the storm inside me was so violent. I had to get a grip. She came into the kitchen, her face lighting up when she saw me. Morning, Mom, you okay? Of course, honey, I said, forcing a smile. Just a little tired. I poured a cup of coffee and handed it to her, trying to keep the shaking of my hands hidden. How's the big presentation going today? Good, I'm excited. Are you sure you're okay? I'm sure, I said, maybe a little too quickly. Just a little off today, but it'll pass. Go get your stuff ready. You don't want to be late. She gave me a concerned look, but didn't press further. I watched her head off, her teenage energy filling the house with life as it always did. But in the pit of my stomach, a heavy weight settled. Nothing was the same anymore. The rug had been pulled out from under me, and I was standing in a house full of things that no longer mattered. How had we come to this? Gregory and I had been married for almost 20 years. It hadn't always been perfect, no marriage is. But we had built a life together, a family, and we had supported each other through the good and bad. We had laughed, cried, raised children together. But somewhere along the way, something had changed. I had changed. He had changed. And the worst part was, I didn't even realize how far apart we had drifted until it was too late. I had given him everything. My career, my dreams, my sense of self, all for the sake of our family. I had raised the kids while he built his career. I had supported him, stayed home when it made sense, worked when it was needed. But in the process, I had lost pieces of myself. I started to think back. The signs had been there, hadn't they? The late nights at work, the sudden business trips, the texts that he'd kept on his phone, the way he became more distant over time. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I was imagining things. But now it all made sense. The emotional distance, the detachment, the lack of intimacy, the little lies that added up over time. How long had he been seeing someone else? How long had he been planning this? Was it really just about the money, or was there something deeper, something darker that I hadn't yet uncovered? I didn't know, and at that moment I didn't care. What I cared about was making sure that he didn't get away with this. What I cared about was finding a way to reclaim my life, my dignity, my power. He might have thought he could discard me with a text message and steal what was rightfully ours, but he had no idea what was coming. I would not let him take everything and leave me broken. No, I was done being the victim in this story. It was time to rewrite the narrative, and it would be a long, calculated plan. A quiet, fierce storm that would leave nothing untouched. The next few days felt like an emotional hurricane, each moment a wave crashing over me, dragging me further into the chaos of my emotions. My mind refused to settle, constantly spinning with the reality of what had happened. Gregory had left. He had taken everything, and now I had to figure out how to survive in the aftermath. The house felt empty, quieter than usual, even with the sound of Amelia bustling around before school and the soft hum of the refrigerator. It wasn't just the physical space that felt hollow, it was my life. I had dedicated so many years to this family, to making sure that everyone else was taken care of. I had worked, yes, but I had also given up pieces of myself, my career, my personal goals, my identity. Everything had revolved around Gregory, around our family, and now I was left staring at the remnants of what once felt like a life worth living. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. I looked the same as I had for years, but something inside me had shifted. I didn't recognize the woman who had spent so many years pouring everything into a marriage that was now crumbling. She was gone, and in her place was someone else. A woman who was learning slowly that it was time to fight for herself. I looked at the phone Gregory had used to send me that cold, heartless message. My hand hovered over it, the weight of the decision heavy on my chest. The betrayal felt raw, and the anger swirled within me like a tornado. I knew that revenge wasn't something I could pursue in haste. No, that would be his game, not mine. I needed to be calm, deliberate, and above all, I needed to be in control. The thought of him moving on so easily, taking what was ours and walking away with no thought of the damage he'd caused, made me sick. But there was more at stake now than just revenge. My children, especially Amelia, were watching me. They were already dealing with enough. I couldn't let them see me fall apart. Instead, I would rise, I would rebuild. But first, I would make sure Gregory understood the consequences of his actions. The first step was obvious: the finances. Gregory had emptied our joint account, leaving me with nothing. But I knew better than to just sit back and accept it. I wasn't helpless. Not anymore. I made a call to our bank explaining the situation. I could almost hear the sympathy in the teller's voice, but I didn't need sympathy. I needed answers. I needed leverage. "We can't reverse the transaction immediately," the teller said, "but we can freeze the account for now, to prevent further withdrawals. You'll need to contact the legal department for a formal request." Legal. That word hit me like a punch in the stomach. It was a reminder that Gregory had not only betrayed me emotionally, but was now trying to steal from me, to take away what was mine, with no regard for the years we had spent building this life together. I hung up the phone, feeling both a sense of dread and a spark of hope. This was it. This was the first step in a long road ahead, and I was ready to walk it. I spent the next few hours gathering all the documents I could find: bank statements, credit card bills, and most importantly, the will that Gregory had insisted we create a few years ago. The will that he thought would protect him if things ever went wrong. Little did he know I had kept a copy. Amelia came home later that afternoon, her face still bright from her day at school. She seemed so unaware, so innocent, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt for what she would soon learn about her father. But I couldn't protect her from the truth forever. "Mom," she said, setting her backpack down, "are you okay? You've been acting different." I met her gaze, my heart aching for her. She deserved better than this. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I replied, though the words felt hollow. "Just trying to figure things out." "I don't want you to be sad," she said quietly, her voice full of concern. My throat tightened. "I'm not sad, honey. I'm just adjusting." I knew I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for her too. She needed to see that even in the face of betrayal, there was power in taking control. I couldn't let her believe that life could knock us down without us getting back up. That night, after Amelia had gone to bed, I sat down at my desk with a glass of wine, staring at the documents spread out in front of me. I had a plan, a way to move forward, but there was one more thing I needed to do. I needed to confront Gregory. I needed to hear him say it, to tell me the truth face to face. I wasn't going to let him run away from this. I wasn't going to let him think he could walk out of our marriage and leave me to pick up the pieces. The phone rang as I was about to dial his number. It was a blocked call. I answered it without hesitation, knowing it was probably him. "Bianca," his voice came through distant cold. "I don't think we need to talk right now. I've already made up my mind." "No," I said, my voice steady, stronger than I felt. "We do need to talk." And with that, the conversation started. The conversation that would change everything. The phone call was a war of words. Gregory's voice on the other end was a mixture of defensiveness and arrogance, his tone flat as though he were reading from a script. Bianca, I've made up my mind. You knew this was coming. You've been unhappy for a long time and I've had enough. I'm sorry it had to end this way. His words were like a slap to the face, but they didn't break me. Instead, they ignited something within me, something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't the same woman who had married him all those years ago, the one who would have taken his words and let them destroy her. I was stronger now, sharper, and he didn't even know it yet. Gregory, I said, my voice tight with controlled fury. You don't get to decide when this ends. You don't get to throw everything we've built away with a few text messages. We're going to have a real conversation. You owe me that much. There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought he might hang up. But instead I heard him sigh. What's the point, Bianca? It's over. No, I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. It's not over until I say it is. You think you can just erase me from your life, take what's ours, and move on? No. You're going to regret that. I will make sure of it. I heard the faint sound of his chair scraping against the floor. What are you going to do, Bianca? You think you can hurt me with your words. I don't care anymore. Maybe you don't care, I said, my voice low but full of purpose. But you'll care when it hits you. When you realize what you've lost. And when you see me take everything back step by step. I hung up before he could say anything else. I didn't need to hear his empty excuses anymore. He had already made his choice, and now I was going to make mine. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and quiet, calculated movements. The bank had frozen our joint account temporarily, which was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it felt like a step in the right direction. I was taking back control piece by piece, and I wasn't going to let him walk away without consequences. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the lies, the betrayal. The years I had spent supporting him, giving up my own dreams and aspirations for the sake of our family. He thought he could simply erase that, walk away with a new life, a fresh start, while I was left to clean up the mess. Well, he was wrong. I reached out to my lawyer, a woman named Claire, who had always been sharp and meticulous in her work. I needed someone who would fight for me, who understood the stakes. Claire immediately scheduled a meeting, and I spent hours going through every financial document, every contract, every piece of evidence that would help me prove my case. Bianca, she said after going through the papers, this isn't going to be easy. Gregory's already made it clear that he's not going to play fair, but you've got a solid case. If you're ready for a fight, I'll be with you every step of the way. I nodded, determination hardening in my chest. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about something far more important, reclaiming my life, my dignity, my sense of self. Gregory had taken so much from me, but he wasn't going to take everything. Not now, not ever. I spent the next few weeks assembling my plan, piece by piece. I wasn't going to make any rash decisions, but I was preparing for every possibility. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Gregory had underestimated me. He thought I was just the wife who had stayed home, who had supported him while he pursued his career. But what he didn't know was that I had been quietly building my own strength all along. I had the skills, the education, the ambition. I had sacrificed them for a time, yes, but they hadn't disappeared. They were still there, just waiting to be reignited. And when they were, I would be unstoppable. But even as I worked toward my own personal recovery, I had to remember that the real battle was just beginning. Gregory had made his choices, but now I had to make mine. And that meant doing whatever it took to take back what was rightfully mine, not just in the courtroom, but in my own life. One afternoon, as I was sitting at my desk, I received a call from the lawyer. The news wasn't good. Gregory had moved his assets into multiple separate accounts, making it harder to track his financial moves. But it didn't faze me. This was his plan, wasn't it? To make things as difficult as possible, to drag me through the mud and make me give up. Well, that wasn't going to happen. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I would fight back with the same level of precision, the same level of strategy that he had used to get what he wanted. He thought he could control the narrative, but I would be the one writing the next chapter. And the first move was already in play. It had been weeks since that phone call, and I could feel the tension building within me like a pressure that had been slowly building and now finally threatened to explode. The more I worked on my plan, the more determined I became. Gregory's arrogance was palpable. He honestly thought that by isolating me by taking our money and leaving me with nothing, he could simply walk away from the wreckage he had caused. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had already taken the first steps to fight back using every piece of evidence I could gather. There was something empowering about taking control of my life again, even if it was just the smallest of steps. The night I decided to put my next move into action, I sat in front of my computer, scrolling through the files, the records, the documents I had been compiling. Every legal step I was taking felt like a stitch in the fabric of my new life. It wasn't just about getting revenge anymore, it was about rebuilding myself, reclaiming my confidence, and making sure that the life I had worked so hard for wasn't stolen from me in one fell swoop. Gregory's affairs, his betrayal, had left me feeling like I was floating in a sea of uncertainty. But now I could see the shore. I could see the way out. I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to thrive. As I prepared to meet with Claire again, I took a moment to reflect. Amelia still didn't know the full truth. I hadn't told her yet. I hadn't been able to. But I could see how much the weight of everything was affecting her. The once vibrant, confident young woman who had always laughed and joked with me now seemed quiet, withdrawn. She noticed the tension between me and Gregory, even though we tried to keep it from her. And yet, despite all of this, I knew I had to stay strong. For her, for myself. The phone call from Claire came just as I was finishing my coffee the next morning. "Bianca," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I've been through the documents and there's something you need to know. Gregory's been hiding assets in offshore accounts. He's been planning for this, making sure that when the divorce happened, he would have a way to avoid splitting everything down the middle." I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me again. Of course he would do that. Of course he would try to walk away clean, pretending like nothing had ever happened. But Claire continued, "We've got a lead. He hasn't covered his tracks entirely. If we move quickly, we can freeze those accounts. You can take him to court for what he owes you." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Let's do it. I'm ready." And just like that, the pieces were in place. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was taking control. I had a plan, and it was going to work. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and emails. I was deep in the trenches working alongside Claire to make sure that everything was in motion. It wasn't easy. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but I didn't care. The more I focused, the more I realized just how much I had been holding back, how much I had sacrificed, for the sake of a family that was no longer there. I kept my distance from Gregory, letting the silence between us stretch on. I was no longer the woman who would beg or plead for him to reconsider. I wasn't going to beg for something that wasn't coming back. But then the unexpected happened. I was sitting at my desk reviewing more paperwork when my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. Gregory. It had been days since he'd reached out. I debated ignoring it, but something told me I should answer. I picked up the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. Bianca. Gregory's voice was strained, almost apologetic. "I've been thinking. I know things have gotten out of hand. Maybe we can work this out. We've been through so much together. I don't want to lose everything." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. His sudden change of heart, his attempt at sounding remorseful, felt like a slap in the face. The same man who had walked away without a second thought, who had betrayed me in the cruelest way, now wanted to fix things. "Gregory," I said, my voice calm but steady, "you don't get to decide when this ends. You've made your choices, and so have I." "I know I hurt you," he continued, desperation creeping into his tone. "I never meant for things to get this far. But I can make it right. We can fix this. Fix." I felt a deep, unshakable sense of calm wash over me. He didn't get to decide how this story ended. I was the one who would write the next chapter. "No, Gregory. This is over. You don't get to make it right anymore." His silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. He wasn't prepared for this. He thought I would cave, that I would somehow let him back in. But that wasn't going to happen. Not anymore. I hung up the phone, my resolve only strengthening. I wasn't going to let him back into my life. Not after everything. Not after the way he had treated me. I had taken enough. Now it was time for him to face the consequences. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life, but they were also the most liberating. I was in control now. Gregory thought he had already won, but he was wrong. I had already won. And the best part, he had no idea what was coming. The weeks that followed felt like a roller coaster. Every day I felt the weight of the battle ahead of me, but with each passing moment I also felt a growing sense of clarity. The world was opening up in ways it hadn't before. I was seeing opportunities both for vengeance and for healing that I hadn't imagined possible. I was no longer just a passive participant in my own life. I was in charge. Gregory's calls became increasingly desperate, filled with hollow apologies and pleas for reconciliation. He claimed he was sorry and that he didn't mean for it to get this bad. Each time he reached out, I could hear the cracks in his voice, the underlying panic that he had finally crossed a line he couldn't undo. He had expected me to fall apart to beg him to stay, but I wasn't that woman anymore. The texts kept coming, too. He seemed convinced that if he could just get me to listen, if he could make me understand his side, I would come back. But I wasn't interested in his excuses. I wasn't interested in any of it. For the first time in years, I was making decisions that were for me, for my future. I could feel the weight of the past slowly lifting piece by piece as I took each step forward with purpose. One evening, I was sitting in my living room, my phone buzzing with yet another message from Gregory. But this time, I was ready. I had the last piece of the puzzle in place, and I knew it was time to act. I had spent hours organizing the legal team, gathering everything I needed to ensure that Gregory would face the consequences of his actions. But beyond the legalities, I had something more personal in mind. It wasn't just about securing my financial future. It was about the emotional justice I deserved. The betrayal, the lies, the way he had disregarded me, all of that needed to be held accountable. Claire. My lawyer had been with me every step of the way. We'd filed the papers, frozen the accounts, and prepared for the legal battle that was soon to come. But there was one final step I hadn't anticipated. One final twist that would not only expose Gregory's deceit, but also force him to face the truth in a way he never imagined. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about making sure he would never again underestimate me. I met Claire in her office the next day, holding a folder with the final pieces of the plan. "We're ready," she said, her voice calm but laced with determination. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "It's time." We went over the details once more, how we would present the evidence in court, how we would expose Gregory's attempts to hide assets, and how we would ensure that the divorce settlement would be in my favor. But as we went over the plan, something shifted inside me. A new thought began to take root. It was time for me to face Gregory face to face, not as a victim, but as a victor. I reached out to him once again. This time, there was no hesitation in my voice when I said the words that would change everything. "Gregory, we need to talk," I said. "It's time to discuss the divorce. But this time, I'm calling the shots." There was a pause, and I could hear the uncertainty in his voice when he replied, "What do you mean?" I said, my voice steady, that I'm not going to let you walk away with everything you've stolen from me. I'm not just going to accept this, Gregory. I'm going to make sure you pay for everything. And I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about everything you've taken from me, from this family." He stammered on the other end of the line, unable to find the right words. It was too late for apologies, too late for any kind of reconciliation, and it was too late for him to think he could still control the situation. "I'll see you in court," I said, hanging up the phone before he could say anything else. That was it, the final conversation. There was nothing left to say. But what happened next was unexpected. A few days later, I received a letter. It wasn't from his lawyer, it was from Gregory himself. In it, he begged for forgiveness, claiming that he had made a mistake. He said he was willing to do anything to fix it, even to start over. He asked me to meet him, to give him one last chance. I read the letter with a cold smile. It was the same desperation, the same empty promises. But this time I wasn't moved. This time I was strong enough to see through it. I threw the letter away without a second thought. In the following weeks, as the legal proceedings started to heat up, I realized that something deeper had shifted within me. This wasn't just about winning a divorce battle. It was about reclaiming my life, my sense of self-worth, and my ability to stand up for what I deserved. The woman I was now wasn't a victim of circumstances. She was a force to be reckoned with. The day in court came, and I sat across from Gregory, his face drawn and weary. He was no longer the confident man he once was. His arrogance had been replaced with fear, and his attempts to manipulate me were met with nothing but silence. The legal battle unfolded smoothly, with Claire expertly presenting the evidence and systematically dismantling his arguments. Gregory's attempts to hide his assets, his lies about the finances, everything came crashing down. By the time we were finished, there was no question about who had been wronged in this situation. When the judge ruled in my favor, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't just about the money or the assets, it was about finally taking control of my own life, about showing Gregory that he couldn't get away with treating me the way he had. But even more than that, I felt something else: freedom. Gregory had thought he could leave me broken, but instead, I had risen from the ashes stronger and more determined than ever. I was no longer defined by his betrayal. I was defined by my own strength. And I would never again allow myself to be anyone's victim. The twists, the turns, the heartbreak, it had all led me to this point. And as I walked out of the courtroom, I realized that the story wasn't over yet. This was only the beginning of the rest of my life.